Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our August webinar series called Setting Up a Company in China. You have reached us on day 5, our last day on this webinar series, where we are going to be looking at how to open your bank account and how to operate it, what it takes to actually operate your account in China. So in the last 4 days, we've been really looking at the key decisions that have to be made when setting up your company in China. On Monday, we were looking at the 9 key decisions. On Tuesday, we were looking at registered capital values and how to make those calculations. On Wednesday, we were looking at location. What are the legal and tax consequences about having a registered office address? And on Thursday, yesterday, we were looking at your corporate management structure. Who are you actually going to appoint within your corporate management structure in China? And so today we're going to finalize everything up with the bank account. Again, like I said, if you want to have an overview, a holistic view of what decisions have to be made prior to setting up your company, take a look at Monday's webinar. It's already up on our YouTube channel. But I did select the 4 main topics, which for me are of key value because they really reflect the operational side of the business, not just the setup, but what's going to happen once you are incorporated. How are you going to use the money? What happens with your registered office address? What's going to happen with the corporate management? Who's going to sign off on things? How are you going to create a type of corporate governance? And then obviously, how are you going to operate the bank account? Now with borders shut, how are you actually going to operate it from your home base? So let's take a look at this in depth. But prior to starting, again, I don't have so many people here. I know it's the final weeks of summer holidays, but if you are watching this on replay on YouTube, let me know. Are you a newbie? Are you a startup or an experienced China hand? Just add a comment and let me know. It's always interesting to know who my audience actually is. How the webinar works, again, this is a bit of a repeat, but just so you know, we're using Zoom meeting. If anything happens to my Wi-Fi, it usually does take about a minute to a minute and a half for me to reboot. I will be coming back on to finish today's presentation. Worst case scenario, if you run into technical difficulties, just log off, log back on. Do it a couple of times. No, we are recording, so you always have an opportunity to review the recording up on our YouTube channel. And we do have a Q&A. There hasn't been so much interactivity this week. Again, not so many people online, and a lot of people have asked to speak directly. So if you do have any questions, again, add them into the YouTube section or just email me directly or contact me, set up a meeting in my diary, and I'll be happy to reach out to you. So again, just to recap who I am, I'm the only expert for this week, and my name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I am a leading expert on inbound investment into China. Basically, 100% of my clients are foreign investors that are looking at market entry into the Chinese and Hong Kong market. I have 17 years of on-the-ground experience in corporate services and compliance. Meaning that we help clients with all of the administrative functions that are required to be maintained when operating companies in both Hong Kong and in China. We help companies in their pre-investment stage all the way through to the implementation of their business models, to the adaptation of their business models, all the way to scaling up and growing in the market. One of the beautiful things about China over the last 17 years has really been the fact that things have become systemized and processes have been implemented by the Chinese governments to make things a little bit more transparent and clear. We have created methodologies to give this type of transparency to people. Timelines are still not 100% transparent, but at least it gives people an idea of order and when things have to be decided upon and how, based on the processes that are implemented by the Chinese government. All of our methodologies are up and shown through webinars, and you can find them up on our YouTube channel. Or alternatively, you can also have one-to-one sessions with us where we guide you through those methodologies. And just to finish off on the intro, in 2020, I wrote a book on the 9 superpowers to succeed in China, which are ultimately 9 very important principles that are required by every company to create a sound foundation, a stable foundation when going into the Chinese market. I relate it to construction. When you are constructing a house or a building, you want the foundation of that building to be solid, to be absolutely bulletproof, so that as you grow and as you scale up the building, there's stability everywhere. I relate this to China and establishing your company and doing business in China. You want to have a sound financial base, not only financial, but administrative base, sound in all areas from HR to finance, etc., to be able to then scale up and grow. So like I've said, we've written this book. It can be found on all the various Amazon channels, and it is available in Kindle as well as in hard copy versions. So let's get cracking on today's presentation, which is an in-depth look on how to open your corporate bank account in China, but more importantly, how to actually operate that bank account in China, okay? I'll also be delving into my own personal experiences with banks, and provide you an up-to-date with an action plan on what to think about when working with the banks in China, all right? So let's get cracking. So you're setting up a company in China. That's the first thing. And in the incorporation process, you have to go through the painful process of opening a bank account. An important aspect to think about is that the bank will do a KYC process on you, which is basically a due diligence process on your company, all right, on who the shareholders are. So it is very important that the banks understand who are ultimately the beneficial owners of the bank, of the shareholder. They need to see who ultimately owns 10% or more of the shares. When you are selecting a bank in China, do your homework, okay? The question is obviously, which bank do you choose? Now, as a corporate service provider, or even as law firms or whomever, recommendations can always be made. But what I want to emphasize is that nobody should be making that decision for you. Meaning, I want people to do their homework. I want people to interview banks to understand what is the right fit. Don't make your providers do this homework for you. It is useless, okay? You need to have those conversations because you are the one who knows exactly what you need from the bank. Check whether the bank can offer those capabilities, understand what the criteria are, understand the communication levels. Do you have the ability to actually speak and communicate with your bank? Understand the approval and operate power of authority rights over your account. And talk about scenarios and what ifs, right, around your bank account. You are the one that's, again, I want to emphasize, you are the one that is developing that relationship, not your corporate service provider, not your lawyer. At some point, your relationship with those parties will end. So you need to take over that relationship, and hopefully you've made the right choice in the bank that you've chosen. So I actually have created an agenda list to guide clients on that first conversation, where they will understand what is required from a documentation perspective to open the bank accounts, but also then to ask questions about the operational side and how it could impact them if they are unable to actually put a foot on the ground in China, right? And do everything from their own home jurisdiction. So, a couple of things that I would say is obtain the document list up front, understanding what is required to be submitted. If you work with foreign banks, the document list will be much more extensive than if you work with local Chinese banks. And that's just because of the People's Bank of China regulations that are put on foreign invested banks like HSBC, Standard Chartered, Citibank, et cetera, compared to the local banks like Bank of China, Bank of Shanghai, ICBC, Merchants Bank, et cetera. Once you, and I just want to emphasize there, when you're having that conversation with the bank, you will also realize whether you will receive a relationship manager or not, which should be a key decision that you make when choosing your bank. Because you can't set foot on the ground in China, do you have the ability to talk to somebody from the bank when you are abroad in the same language that you do, to be able to ask questions or queries, and not just rely on your staff to be doing that for you, okay? Because the bank controls your money. You are the one that's investing that money. So having a relationship manager, in my opinion, is key. especially during your startup phase, as you're trying to figure out how to operate that account, do the banks offer this? Okay. Once the incorporation process is moving forward, you then have your business license, which is issued, and that has to be submitted to the bank, together with a whole other series of documentation. But nothing can be submitted until at least you've got your business license on hand, the company chops on hand. Okay. Now, prior to COVID, all banks were required by the People's Bank of China to meet the legal representative face-to-face, or to at least receive the original passport of the legal representative in order to be able to do the final steps of the bank account opening. Now, under COVID, because nobody could travel to China, regulations became more localized in regards to this point. So in a place like Shanghai, most banks are willing to do a Zoom conference call with the legal representative who will show their original passport, or the legal representative has to do a video of themselves reading out a blurb that has to be read out, holding their passport copy. Or in places like Shenzhen, where they are refusing to do bank account openings unless the legal rep actually travels to Shenzhen, has this 2-hour face-to-face meeting, shows the original passport, and that's it. In places like Shenzhen, unfortunately, there's been a limitation on the number of incorporations that have actually occurred there because of this limitation of the bank. There are loopholes around it. So for example, if you already have staff that you're looking to hire, you can use the staff as being the legal rep for an interim period to open bank account, and then change that at a later date once you are able to travel in and change the legal rep, and then you can go to the bank to complete that step where you take over as authorized signatory. So there can be loopholes. It just depends on what you have available on the ground to be able to handle that. Okay. Once all the documents are submitted, bank accounts have been viewed, videos have been viewed, etc., then the People's Bank of China requires now, since August of last year, that the bank visits the offices, the registered office addresses, to prove that they are not in virtual office locations, but that they are actually in operational offices, which is why, again, my webinar from Wednesday is so critical about selecting your registered office address and not just going with a virtual location. Okay. The whole bank account opening process, if everything is relatively smooth, will take about 25 to 30 working days for the full capital account and renminbi basic account to be opened. So there are 2 accounts that are opened. One is the capital account, where your registered capital, day 2 of the webinar series, will be injected. And then the renminbi basic account, which is your day-to-day transactional account. Renminbi basic account is where your funds are kept in renminbi, but it does not mean that foreign currency funds can't go into those accounts and then be converted. Okay, I'll explain a little bit more on that later on. And then don't forget that once that's all done, you still have to do further applications in terms of online banking. Particularly with COVID regulations, you need to make sure your online banking is up and running. That's probably the #1 priority out of everything. So the 25 to 30 working days is really to get the account numbers for the capital account and the renminbi basic account, but it does not have anything to do with setting up your online banking operation, okay? The online banking operation is going to be very different bank to bank. The platforms are quite difficult. I cannot really say one is easier than another to operate. It's just you all get UKey tools. You've got to download the software on your computer. With some banks, sometimes you have to download the software every single time that you want to make a transaction. With other platforms, it takes forever to put in your passcode. Sometimes you have to put it in 10 times before actually the page opens up. I cannot say that there is one platform from a bank that is absolutely perfect. It's not true. They're all, I don't want to say they're rubbish. They're all manageable and doable from an operational from abroad. It's just you have to have the patience to do it the first time, know how to continue to do it thereafter, and then it just becomes a process, okay? You do need key tools, to be able to log in. You will have passwords that are being generated. Generally speaking, with the Chinese banks, you get two key tools, one that is operated by your cashier, and the other which is operated by the authorizer of the account, okay, who will make approvals on all transfers that are going to be made. It usually does take about 10 working days for the online banking to be approved in order to get the key tools, and then it can take quite some time to get that software uploaded because a lot of the banks don't use, for example, Google Chrome or all of those functions. You have to use the old Internet Explorer search engines search engines to be able to log in. Then once you've got all of that up and running, simultaneously to doing the online banking operation, you can then transfer registered capital from the shareholder into the capital account. Up to you what value you want to choose on that. I would look at what your initial working capital is required and then do that transfer. That money will then remain in the capital account, and you have to do a confirmation letter to say it has arrived for it to then be utilized. Okay. And in the first 3 to 4 months of operation, you will be working out of the capital account, where any expenses that have to be paid, like rent, salaries, etc., you will need to show contracts of these expenses, invoices of these expenses in order to be able to do any transfers. And a lot of that is things that have to then be couriered over, or you have to meet with the bank face-to-face in order to get those transfers actually initialized. It will not be done from the online banking system yet. After 3 to 4 months, as the bank is seeing that you have recurring expenses, they will then authorize that money that can be transferred from the capital account into the renminbi basic account. But for the first 3 to 4 months, it is a bit of a pain to show this proof of expenditure that is recurring. And that's basically the incorporation stage, okay? And I just want people to remember, as we now reflect on the operational side, that the account opening process is just a determinate time frame to open the account. You should not be choosing the banking partners based on what that process is, okay? Whether it's faster or slower than other people. You need to determine your banking partner based on your needs from the bank, whether it's having credit facilities, whether it's having a debit card, credit card, whether it's being able to manage your account from overseas, whether it's having a relationship manager available to you to be able to have discussions with in the English language about your bank account, about transactions that are occurring, about documents that may be needed, okay? This partnership will last the full validity of your organization. And just to emphasize, I've said that 2 accounts have to be open, the capital account and the renminbi basic account. It is difficult to close down a capital account and open up somewhere. And renminbi basic accounts, once those are open, that is your renminbi basic account for life. So it's not easy to switch banks per se. You can open up settlement accounts in other banks, but your renminbi basic account will be stuck with that original bank. So again, have these discussions with the banks to know what they can offer you. This should, again, not be a decision that is made by your providers that are doing the incorporations. This is really the homework you need to be doing to understand who can assist you. So before we start looking at the operational side, let's look a little bit at how to choose your banking partner in China and sort of what considerations you should be thinking about in your mind as you're choosing that partner. So in China, all banks are available. You've got the international banks and you've also got the Chinese banks, okay? And there are pros and cons between both, all right? I will share my experience, which might, is by all means biased because of what I've experienced. But I cannot really say one is better over the other. It really comes down to what your needs are from the banks. If very simply, you don't need credit facilities, you don't need loans, so you're simply using the bank for trade transactions or service transactions, for me, I would just simply go with one of the local banks. And then eventually, if you do need credit facilities or whatnot, you have a history with that bank for a period of 2 to 3 years, and you can apply for those types of things. Don't make the assumption that with international banks, it's easier to work with them. It's not, because they have restrictions from the People's Bank of China, which regulates the financial sector. They've got it harder than the Chinese banks do. So because they have it harder, they're making it harder for their clients as well. And in many instances, what I feel is that the international banks actually choose you as a client, whereas the Chinese banks will just accept you as a client. And you can choose which Chinese bank you want to work with. All right. Again, I've highlighted quite a few times now, it's all about analyzing what your banking needs are, okay? So you should always consider the nature of your business transactions. If your business is primarily focused on domestic, then I would recommend choosing a Chinese bank because your customers in China will be working with Chinese banks. If the bulk of your business takes place within China, you are unlikely to have any international remittances, then going with that local Chinese bank, again, makes sense, okay? So if you've got domestic oriented business, go with a local Chinese bank. It's gonna make your life a lot easier because your partners in China will be using the Chinese banks as well. Don't forget that the Chinese banks have a much larger network. They do have convenient services. Like I said, the internet platforms are not perfect by any means, but once you get the hang of it, you get the hang of it, and it just becomes a process, okay? If your business is solely a cost center, then perhaps an international bank would be of a better fit because, and particularly using the international bank that services your shareholding company, okay? International banks might also be more beneficial if you're doing production and 100% export. But like I said, with international banks nowadays, the feeling that I get is that they choose you versus you being able to choose them. They will have very strict criteria on on how to accept you as a client. And they will base that in many instances on your registered capital. What is the value of that? They will base it on your estimated turnover within the first 12 to 24 months. And if you don't even have a single transaction that's running through the company, which is the case we have now, within 12 months, they can also just freeze your account or even close it down. So you've got to be very careful working with the international banks. And this is why I say, you know, don't automatically make the assumption that an international bank will fit your needs. You really have to have that discussion with them about what they can offer you, whether they will accept you as a client, and what's the long-term vision of working. If you need a loan, either you get a loan from a Chinese bank or you get a loan from your overseas bank. But getting loans from international banks in China will be relatively difficult, okay? So again, it's important to understand what your needs are. Do you need credit facilities? Do you need loans? Do you also need credit cards, debit cards? International banks don't issue those. You'll have to go with a Chinese bank if you want those. So, you know, again, it's really important to have these discussions with the banks to understand what they can offer you based on the needs that you need. Location of the bank. Now, I highlight this because, again, it comes down to operations. When you choose your registered office address, that should be your operational office. You should try to choose a bank branch that is close to that operational office, okay? Now, the closest bank may not always be the most convenient because they may have long lines at lunchtime or whatever, but it is important to understand which bank branches are around your operational office, how close are they, because there is a lot of work that has to physically be done at the bank. And things have changed with COVID, but they're slowly going back now, where with COVID, you could do a lot through courier. But again, now they're wanting to see people face-to-face, have discussions. So from an operational perspective, you don't want your staff to be sitting in traffic for an hour, hour and a half, because the bank that you've chosen is that far away from your office, or the closest bank branch is that far away from your office, all right? And again, this is really critical. I've experienced this personally, where, even though the distance is short, I could be sitting in traffic for 35 minutes, then wait in a line at the bank. It could be 2 hours that I'm out of the office to do one thing that I have to submit, and they need my signature, so I'm the one who's doing it, right? So we want to create, again, a very efficient structure in China, where your in-house team or even your outsourced provider is not spending hours doing things that actually could be efficiently done if it was a 5-minute walk away. Okay, so when you're analyzing your location and your registered office address, use that opportunity to analyze the amenities that are around your office in terms of the bank branches and everything else that you might need. All right, this is just a little bit of my experience and my clients' experiences when dealing with the banks. So if you are a trading company in a large office building and you have to submit original documents to the bank, which I'll explain why you have to do that, you can find overcrowded, long waits. Again, you can have your staff members spending up to 2-3 hours in the bank just waiting, physically waiting for the number to be able to submit anything, right? You obviously also, if you are the one who is a foreigner working with the bank, you want to be able to communicate in your native tongue, or at least in English. So choosing a bank that has desk clerks or people that have English speaking staff is critical. Not all the bank branches have this capability. You'll find that closer to the CBD areas. So in Shanghai, for example, if you look at Nanjing Shilu or Pudong, Lujiazui area, you'll find that most bank branches, they'll have people who speak English in there. And again, you want to work with a bank that is working in your best interest, not a bank that is working against you, which many times could happen with the international banks. So what do foreign investors choose in general, right? That is probably a big question that I get asked is, okay, Christina, yeah, we know what our needs are, but I just want to know very simply, what are your clients choosing in terms of banks, right? So foreign investors in China often prefer to work with an international bank. That is their immediate thought process is, we want to work with an international, we want to work actually with the existing bank that we're working with at home, and where we're already working with other subsidiaries globally, so that we can have a unified online platform. That's ultimately what they say to me. And then I kind of go through the pros and cons and my experiences with working with the international banks by reflecting on what it takes operationally to manage those accounts. Okay. It does not mean that because you have an international relationship with a bank that you will obtain that level of service locally in China, because most likely you won't. All right. Working with Chinese banks is not as daunting and as overwhelming as many companies or people assume it to be. In many instances, it can be tremendously more efficient because they have more lenient rights imposed on them by the People's Bank of China compared to the international banks. Okay. And don't forget that the Chinese commercial banks have a lot more branches available. So even, if I think about our office, you've got Bank of China, ICBC, Merchants Bank within a 5 to 10 minute walking, but then you also have within 15 minutes the same branches again, because we're right in the CBD. So you might not go to your closest branch, but you might go to the other one because there are fewer people or there's an English speaker there. And as long as it's easily accessible by your team or by you, then it's absolutely fine. And again, I'm probably showing a little bit more my bias that I do like Chinese banks more than I like the international banks, just because of the efficiency of the actual operational side. Once you realize that your customers are also using local Chinese banks, so the third parties that you're collaborating with, whether it's logistics providers, suppliers, customers, they will have the tendency to also be working with local Chinese banks. And that just means that the transactional time frame will be faster than if you are paying out of an international bank or paying into an international bank. Again, things have improved dramatically, so I am generalizing quite a bit here, guys, but that is the tendency, okay? Um, um, Chinese banks generally, I mean, I'm going to just touch a little bit on the last point. Chinese banks generally offer greater bank account security. I say this to give people a sense of calm, because their first thought is, oh, well, if we operate with a Chinese bank, then you know the whole thing with the new security law in Hong Kong, they can gain access to all of our information. Well, the government can gain access to any of your information, whether it's with the government, whether it's with your bank account, regardless if you're working with an international bank or a local bank. When you're operating in China, you will probably, I anyway, have a more calm sense when operating with a Chinese bank than I do with an international bank. Don't ask me why, it's just a sense. It's a gut feeling that I have more confidence with them, okay? And again, I'm saying this of 17 years, having worked with both international bank and local Chinese bank. But that is just the sensation that I get, okay? Before I touch on to the next subject, what do some of the larger companies do in China? What they will do is they will have their capital account, which is where the registered capital comes in, or the investment capital comes in. If you've got several investors, then that all has to flow into that capital account. They will probably open that up with the international bank that they have a working relationship with abroad, okay? They will then open up the renminbi basic account with a Chinese bank. Now, if you are a small, medium-sized company, the time requirement needed to work with two separate banks on two communication levels is just inefficient, okay? And yes, at some point, all of your capital will be used up and you will stop that communication with that foreign bank. But I just like, again, simplicity, that collaborating with one bank, having one communication partner just eases things. We are doing currently a change of shareholder application for a client in Shanghai. And we are now doing the change of investor with the banks. And the internal staff don't even know where the capital account is because they've stopped using it. All the capital has been used, but they don't even know where it is. They don't know, they don't have a record of it. To the point where we've now had to ask the old investor, where did you open that account? Do you have the account information? It's not being kept internally. The local team knows exactly the renminbi basic account, but they know nothing about the capital account. This is the problems when you aren't dividing things, right? Is that as you get staff turnover, as you get new GMs, information gets lost. And again, this is your foundation, right? You can't lose your foundation. So again, we're in a situation right now where we have to inform whoever is running that capital account, we have to inform that bank of this change, and we don't know who it is. All right. So again, I'm thinking about small, medium-sized companies. I'm thinking about simplicity. Let's create simplicity for you, and let's just choose one bank that can offer all those functions. I want people to understand a little bit about the Chinese banking system and how legislation and regulations work. Okay, and give you kind of an idea of the names of the banks that are out there, so you know what's available. Okay, so when you look at the hierarchy of all of the banking system, you've got at the top the People's Bank of China, who creates the legislations and controls everything. Excuse me, in China, they are basically the decision makers. And ultimately, the bank that you choose, when you do your KYC process, it gets passed up to the People's Bank of China for approval. You then have three policy banks, the China Development Bank, Export-Import Bank of China, Agricultural Development Bank of China, that helps to create the policies that are being generated around the banks, like credit facility. Like during COVID, there were a lot of new functionalities and services created to help people. And those were developed through these three policy banks. You then have 5 state-owned commercial banks, the big 5, which is ABC, Agricultural Bank of China, Bank of Communications, ICBC, and China Construction Bank. And then you've got 12 joint stock commercial banks, banks like China Merchants Bank, Bank of Shanghai, etc. And then the foreign banks as well, like HSBC, Standard Chartered, Citibank, the German banks are there, the French banks are there, etc. Right? So that's kind of the local banking structure in China. Then let's talk a little bit about the accounts that are being opened up, okay? And there are a variety of different types of accounts in China that can be opened up. And I've listed here 5 of the most common types of accounts that are open. So as I highlighted earlier, the first one and the last one are the 2 mandatory accounts you have to set up, which is the renminbi basic account and the capital contribution account, okay? Capital contribution account is where your registered capital is going into. Renminbi basic account is where you are transacting in renminbi on a daily basis. You can then have a general account, which is what I would otherwise call a settlement account that could be in another type of currency, and you could have a separation of business where trade goes through general account and service goes through renminbi basic, or however you want to do it. You can do everything in the renminbi basic account if you wish, but you could also create settlement accounts if you wanted. You could also have specialized accounts. For example, there was in the past the option of opening up temporary accounts during your incorporation phase to remit part of your registered capital prior to even your business license being issued to pay off expenses. This is difficult to open up now, but there are these types of specialized accounts that can be opened. And then you've got your loan account, which is if you apply for a loan or you want to repatriate your foreign debt loan, which is the difference between the registered capital and the total investment that you've allocated, which if you don't know those terms, go back to day 2 of this webinar series, all about registered capital, total investment, and that will be highlighted there. But you've got a foreign debt loan, which goes into this loan account. It does take also 25, 30 working days to open that account. So you've got to think about timeline if you're planning on repatriating that in. But these are the basic accounts that are going to be established. Like I said, most startups will start off with the capital contribution account and the renminbi basic account to get things running, flowing, and everything can be done out of those 2 accounts. Again, what we want is simplicity and reduce any form of complexity. As I highlighted, I just want to reemphasize this: capital contribution account and loan account. Registered capital enters the capital contribution account. So for example, let's say you have a registered capital of 1 million. That 1 million will, let's say it's 1 million USD, will go into this capital account directly. Once that 1 million renminbi, 1 million USD has been all sent over, you actually have no use of the capital contribution account unless you increase your registered capital again. If you have the foreign debt loan, you need to open up a loan account, and the foreign debt loan goes into that loan account. It does not go into the capital contribution account. So that just needs to be made clear. Renminbi and general account are related to your basic business, right? The transactions that are going to be flowing on a day-to-day basis through your company, okay? So any form of trade services, trade transactions, any form of service transactions, dividend repatriation, this is all going to be going out through these current accounts, which is the renminbi basic and the general account. As I said earlier, the renminbi basic account is a renminbi account, okay? So most startups in China will just have the renminbi account. When you have the 1 million USD sitting in your capital account, it will be eventually brought into the renminbi basic account and converted into renminbi, okay? If you've got trade transactions and payment is being made into your renminbi basic in USD, pound, sterling, whatever, Hong Kong dollar, it will then be converted again upon arrival and put into that renminbi basic account. It won't be kept in pounds or sterling unless you create a general account, which is a settlement account that holds those funds. Okay. Payment options. which is also really important, particularly in today's date where nobody can go on the ground, travel on the ground to operate their accounts. Unless, of course, you appoint local staff to operate your bank account, okay? But domestic renminbi payments in China are generally transacted through online banking, so the website of the bank, branch banking, face-to-face at the bank, or through WePay, Alipay type of apps, all right? So basically, if you have a WeChat account and you want to do transactions through the company account, you've got to attach your bank account to your WeChat account to be able to then pay through WePay or Alipay likewise, okay? But you've got these three options to pay and receive renminbi. It's through online banking, branch banking, or through the direct connectivity options, okay? Doing domestic transactions is easy, very easy, particularly if it's all in renminbi, no problems whatsoever. The difficulties, or I don't want to say difficulties, the operational complexity arrives when you've got cross-border payment considerations, okay? With cross-border payments, you need to provide supporting documentation to the bank to prove authenticity of those transactions, okay? So for example, you're bringing in your registered capital into the capital account, you've got to prove that that is registered capital, okay? If you are doing a trade transaction, so let's say you have a UK supplier selling goods to your entity in China, okay? And you've got to eventually pay that UK supplier. In order to do that outbound payment, you need to provide a whole series of documentation with the company CHOP stamped on each page, plus the invoice, so contract, invoice, potentially even shipping documentation to the bank in order for the bank to then release the funds to the UK. That whole bureaucratic procedure of receiving those agreements is not just a matter of the bank receiving the agreements and saying, okay, you've sent me these agreements, check, we'll release the funds. No, they actually read through those agreements. They read through that the agreement, the invoice, and potentially the shipping documents all match to then be able to release the funds. So outbound payments can take up to 8 weeks, if not even longer, to be able to repatriate. So the process needs to be started early. And if I can make any suggestion at all, it would be to have open-ended contracts and agreements so that once they've read an agreement, they read it once, you tell them and it's open-ended that there will be more transactions later on. And then at that point, the process can actually be faster because they don't have to go through the agreement, match it with the invoice. They've already read it once, they've approved it, and it's done. Similarly with service transactions, let me explain an incoming payment. So let's say a Chinese company is issuing an invoice for service to an overseas company. How it works is that, let's say the UK client pays, it sits in a type of an escrow account. The company in China gets notified it has arrived. The bank will inform them what documents needs to be submitted. And usually it's 2 copies of a service agreement, 2 copies of an invoice, every page with a company CHOP placed on it. We are able to courier those documents now, especially for service-oriented transactions. We can courier the documents, and within 2 to 3 working days, they'll release the funds into your account. So this is why yesterday, when I was talking about corporate management, I was reflecting on the example of company CHOPs. Where are those going to be kept? And how are you going to operate that? Because that could delay times of release of payment. And I'll explain why in my own case study in terms of how we operate. But cross-border payment considerations, it's old school. It's not something that is easy. You always have to have the supporting documentation available. It takes time. And you have to be very patient that you can repatriate out. I have spoken to companies that work with companies in China where they are waiting, the overseas company is waiting for payment from the Chinese company And it can end up being over a year before they see payment because it's stuck with the tax authorities. So not fun, but it's just, I don't foresee any of that changing anytime soon in terms of timing. It's just something that you have to take into account when you are invoicing and when you're expecting payment to be made. Why are there all of these issues? Well, it's basically because of the foreign exchange controls. Okay, moving money in and out of China, there are very strict rules placed by the PBOC and the State Administration of Foreign Exchange about how money is transferred out, how money is transferred in. The authenticity of that money is of utmost importance to the Chinese banks. And hence, I would almost say these types of transactions are closed, meaning that, you know, there is so much documentation and so much bureaucracy behind these types of transactions that it makes it very difficult to operate. Okay, one thing to keep in mind with the foreign exchange controls is that banks and other types of financial institutions, they have to report all domestic and overseas cash transactions of more than 50,000 RMB. Previously, it was 200,000 RMB, and they've now actually decreased that to 50,000 RMB. So, you know, I was talking about, you know, security. Any bank, whether it's a Chinese bank or a national bank, they are required to report all cash transactions. That's actual physical cash going into the bank. Banks will also need to report any overseas transfers by individuals of $10,000 or more. That's 10,000 USD or more. And then all banks must report to the central government on any single foreign exchange transactions of at least 5 million USD. So there's a lot of reporting, back and forth approvals that the banks themselves have to go through with the PBOC, that it's, you know, this is all very complex. And I'm highlighting this aspect to make it clear that it's not the companies in China fault if there are delays in doing overseas transfers or when receiving transfers internally to release those funds. Because the amount of documentation and back and forth questions that come from the bank is heavy. It's heavy. That you do have to be patient. And don't forget also, with any outbound transfer that has to be made, taxes have to be declared and paid prior to the remittance. One of the documents that the banks requires to see is the tax declarations and the tax receipts. So again, you know, you're also asking the company to pay the taxes up front before any transfer can be made. You've got to make sure they've got the cash flow available to be able to do that. So I just want to emphasize again, it is heavy. Now, I want to share a little bit my experience with the banks, and especially my current situation being that I'm not on the ground in China, to explain a little bit how it works with us. And again, we're service oriented, we're not trade oriented, but I hope this will give a little bit of insight that it's all doable, okay? So in the past, when we first arrived in 2003, we decided to work with HSBC. This is not me trying to say anything bad about HSBC. I think HSBC through the PBOC had to do their own thing, but it just caused a bad experience for me. So we have our head office in Hong Kong using HSBC for over 50 odd years. Strong relationship, and we decided in 2003 to use HSBC in Shanghai with absolutely no issues, because back in those days, that was very much feasible. Lo and behold, I believe it was in 2014, 2015, I get a random email. I will say from an HSBC email address, but not my relationship manager or anything like that, saying I had 30 days to close my account and transfer to a new bank. And that the bank was instilling very strict criteria on the types of clients that they were going to manage and handle. And they were not interested in working with our company anymore, regardless of the relationship that was being held in Hong Kong. For them, China was a separate relationship from Hong Kong. And this is what I want to emphasize, is that when you're looking at the relationships between the banks, does China even care? Okay. I took the email as a hoax, didn't take action. 2 weeks later, I get a follow-up email I'm like, okay, that's strange that it's 2 emails in a row. Let me call the bank. Call the bank. I had 2 weeks to change accounts. Mad rush to find a bank, decided to go with ICBC, mainly because of location and availability near our office at that time, and have been happy with ICBC ever since. Okay, platform is fine. Platform is in English. Platform is also in Chinese. My team works with it in Chinese. I work with it in English. I have all I need from the account. Those 30 days, though, were very stressful. I'm not going to lie. And having that time limit put on me was extremely stressful. And so, you know, you've got to imagine for 2 weeks, my only thought for those 2 weeks was bank account, bank account, bank account, bank account. And then the following 2 weeks was all about, okay, transfer of capital, getting everything, updating all of our clients on our new banking details, getting our whole system updated with our new banking details. I mean, the whole administrative back end of our data acquisition with our bank account, we have to update everything. So it almost did take about 6 weeks to get everything settled, which was 6 weeks of my time not spent at all in the business. 6 weeks of my 1 or 2 team members also not on the business, but just purely on fixing this banking situation. Again, my goal with companies is to be able to scale up, and to scale up in a level where they, again, their foundation is solid and they do not have to think about any of these little things happening, which is why I'm emphasizing so much on doing your homework and choosing the right bank that fits your experience, right? We want to work with banks that offer a seamless and continuous experience, okay? I have a client who uses HSBC now. They are using HSBC in Shanghai. HSBC Shanghai was not happy to be collaborating with them because they will not have the same business volume in China as they do in the UK. And HSBC openly said, you know, I'm not happy about this. I will accept it because the UK has asked us to, but I will be making a loss off of you. So don't expect a seamless experience is basically what they said. They are just being truthful and honest based on what their situation is. So again, it's important to know what the capabilities of the banks are, what are they going to be able to offer you, etc. All right. Action plan. What I want people to ultimately achieve when working with the banks is open communication. So as an action plan, I want people to meet with various banks, compare service level and communication level. The banks will want to understand what you do. So do you have a type of business plan? What is your registered capital? What's your future investment? What do you think your annual turnover might be in your first year, second year, third year? Be open and explain everything that you are doing, planning on doing, and need from them. If you are not open with that level of communication, you won't know if they can be of assistance to you, okay? You should be discussing with them how many accounts are going to be needed. You should be discussing with them what accounts are available to be opened, okay? And what will be the function of each of those accounts. Again, what services will you require from them? Is it credit facilities? Is it loans? Do you need debit credit cards? What do you need from the bank to service your organization in China? Okay. Every bank, you know, when I talk about debit cards and credit cards, every bank has a different regulation about this. Okay. And many won't be issuing those debit credit cards from day one. You'll need to have a certain level of history with the bank before they do that. Understand what documents are needed for the opening of the account, what documents are needed for operating the account. So, you know, when you have a service transaction or a trade transaction and you have cross-border payments, what do they need? Get that up front so you know what is required. And, you know, there'll be changes, but at least you have an idea up front to start off with. Understand at what point the legal rep's passport is needed. So we had a client in the past that worked with China Merchants Bank. And with this client, anytime that they repatriated a portion of the registered capital, the original legal rep passport needed to be couriered over. It was a nightmare, okay? We needed to wait for the legal rep's passport, bring it face to face to the bank, before they would even release the funds. And that all came down to whether the legal rep didn't need his passport at that time and if he could send it over for a week. So, even when you are discussing with the bank, say, if we're going to be repatriating registered capital in chunks, when do you need the legal rep passport? When do you have to see us physically? Because with COVID, we're not able to travel. So how do we do and manage all of this? The other is the online platform, right? What you need to know is there a Chinese and English online banking system, and are they synchronized, and how easily accessible is the online banking system? I would almost ask for a demo to see what it looks like, how it works, how it functions, and how it can be used. Then, do you want to receive notifications? So do you want to receive notifications by email, by SMS, by WeChat that payments have been received, or that payments are being sent out? Most of the time it's done by SMS, and you have to provide a local Chinese number in order to be able to get those notifications. So will you get a number? Who will keep that number? And who's going to watch out for those notifications? If you're doing bank signatories, what options do you have for bank signatories, and who is going to be responsible for maintaining the financial CHOP, legal rep CHOP, and then who's going to actually be signing? And then outbound payments. So if you are considering to set up repatriation strategies, which is outbound, basically creating outbound payments, which is service fees or dividends, what is the document list and payment flow? And how long does it take to get those things done? These are all upfront things you should be talking about on the agenda when you are investigating and doing your homework on the banks that you would actually like to work with. So I'd love to hear what your takeaways are from today. What did you learn? And again, if you're watching on this on replay, please do type that into the comments section so I can learn and understand. And if you've got any questions, do let me know. Again, nothing has popped in this week. It's been a very quiet week for this webinar series, but if you do have any questions, just let me know as well. How we can help companies in an overview and a holistic point of view is we can, again, do network introductions to banks, real estate agents, business centers. We offer education and advisory. We offer market research, business plan, budget creation, and validation. We offer supervisory services. We can act as the financial managers. We also offer non-executive director services. We do trademark registrations, incorporation, and then all the services around implementation and growth. If you've got any questions about our services or what we can do for you, or about the content from this webinar series, don't hesitate to reach out. Christina@woodburnglobal.com is my email address. There's also the link here, which directs you to my diary, where you can immediately book an appointment. So you might want to just click pause if you want to copy any of these details and you're watching this on replay. So just to follow up on what's coming up next month. So on Tuesday, September 7th, we've got Save Your Brand in China, where we'll be talking about trademarks, trademark registrations. And then the September webinar series is all about getting ahead of your China numbers. So we're going to be looking at, can I get my profit out of China? Do you have the financial resources to go into China? Are there preferential tax policies for foreign startups in China? How does value-added tax work in China, and what is the golden tax system? And then, do you have the capabilities of operating your China bank account, which will be a little bit similar to today's presentation. If you're interested in subscribing to those, go to our website, woodburnglobal.com/events, and you'll be able to register for those. Our Tuesday session from that webinar series will be done in conjunction with the China-Britain Business Council. So it'll actually be their URL that you'll be registering with. We're doing that as a combined event. I want to thank everybody who's been watching this webinar series for their time spent with us. And we look forward to seeing you again in September. We wish everyone a fantastic end of the holiday season and a good start to the second half of the year. Take care and goodbye.